This is Tom Fox. Welcome to a special edition of the FCPA Compliance Report. This episode is sponsored by Traliant. In this episode, Maria Davanzo and Andrea Foster Mack and myself consider incorporating EHS and safety into a ESG program for your organization. We all see safety as a key component of an overall ESG program, and how can you measure this, report it, and utilize it to drive not only sustainability in your organization, but also make your culture better. I know you'll enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode, and today we actually have double trouble because I have two from Traliant, Andrea Foster Mack and Maria Davanzo. And we're going to talk about ESG, but from a different angle than we normally do. But before we do, Andrea, first of all, I found out you live very near my hometown. So kudos to anyone who's from Franklin, Texas.
I started in safety way back in 2003 and actually helped to launch a youth safety program with federal OSHA and worked with the Senate and subcommittees on safety and health, as well as a lot of great other organizations to help make safety for young workers at the forefront of today's society. We actually trained about 3 million youth across the country and really had some great impact there, which was fantastic. So I've been in the safety realm for about 20 years now and really have just loved it and really excited to go into this new aspect of ESG as well.
And Maria, first of all, welcome back.
I am the Chief Evangelist Officer at Traliant, and before that, I was the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Cushman & Wakefield for 10 years, where my responsibilities included not just ethics and compliance and privacy, but also ESG. So hopefully I can add to the conversation from that perspective.
When you guys proposed a podcast to focus on the S, and I'm going to say safety, in ESG, I just jumped at it. And I did it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think we talk about it nearly as much as we should as a part of ESG. We talk about safety for safety's sake, but I see it in a much broader context. Two, I grew up as a personal injury defense lawyer in the Gulf Coast region, where I saw a complete shift in the attitudes towards safety due to some catastrophic plant explosions in the late 80s, but leading up to the early 90s with the Exxon Valdez. And when the Exxon Valdez accident or incident happened, Exxon looked inward and they decided their culture of safety was lacking, and they elevated safety to number one in the energy and petrochemical space. And because Exxon did it, they forced every other company to do it. And so I saw a huge sea change, literally, where every meeting in any energy company is opened with a safety moment. Whether it's an all-hands meeting of 9,000 employees or 3 people in a conference room, you have to have a safety moment. And what that did was it drove a culture of safety throughout the organization. So I see safety as hugely important, but I also see it as a part of ESG. So, Andrea, if you feel that way or you feel that's a fair assessment, what are your thoughts on that really from a safety professional's?
You know, I kind of see ESG and EHS as almost one and the same. So there's a lot of commonalities across the board. And I personally feel that EHS is embedded within every single aspect of ESG. And I know a lot of people are going to say just specifically the S, the social, the safety aspect of it. But I see it, of course, in the environmental aspect of it, as well as the governance aspect.
Can we talk about safety as a human capital issue? I've talked to numerous people over the past sort of 12 months who have said talent acquisition and retention will be the number one differentiator of corporations going forward, because of things like data analytics, ChatGPT, AI, etc. But it will make human capital and human talent more important.
Safety, it's a huge component in the human capital equation. So as an EHS professional, our goal is to make sure that all of our employees, they feel safe as well as heard in our organizations. Everything from psychological safety, training on diversity and inclusion, prevention of discrimination, our hazard awareness training. All of these things help people feel heard, valued, and secure within our organizations. So from an employee standpoint, who have a voice and know that they can use it without fear of ridicule, retaliation, or reprisal, are more likely to recognize hazards, help report the hazard, and help organizations reduce those risks.
Maria, this next point might maybe bleed or move over a little bit more to the compliance realm, but I'd like to pick up on a point Andrea ended with, which is speak up. Certainly in the energy industry, even as a lawyer, I was taught if you see something, say something, but it related to safety. How can perhaps compliance professionals really embrace that message for our speak up culture, for our hotline, for our reporting system, and maybe learn from our our safety colleagues of how they were able to implement a true.
It struck me as you were talking about your experiences, with Exxon and the others in those industries when they created a safety moment in meetings, right? And I think one thing that might be lacking that would be super helpful to the compliance community is if managers and leaders would include an ethics and compliance moment in some of their meetings, right? Just like there are safety moments. And if they were to do that, that would make ethics and compliance more, part of the DNA, just like safety is. And then I think speak up would come along naturally with that, right? So part of that moment, that ethics and compliance moment, could be if you see something on the ethics and compliance side, just like on the safety side, we implore you to please, speak up and report it to the organization. So yeah, I think there's lots of lessons to be learned from the safety world that are transferable to ethics and compliance if we do it right.
Andrea, every time I sit down with a true safety professional to talk to them about safety training, I realize you guys are light years beyond where we are in compliance. And I was at one company where the CEO led a safety training session. And, he took time out of his schedule. He was prepared, and he made sure everyone in there darn well knew he thought it was important, and they better think it was important. How have you and your colleagues been able to really imbue that culture literally down to the lawyer who comes in for a legal meeting, understanding we're going to talk about safety here?
So I think, if you look at EH&S and you look at our, that organization as a whole and professionals in that realm, we have to have that buy-in at the top level and really having that support from leaders in our organizations truly helps make a difference. If you look at, I always kind of look at the EMR, right? The experience modification rate, as well as worker compensation claims. And if you as an organization as a whole say, okay, safety is really paramount for us, and we're going to make sure that, we focus on safety, we focus on hazard mitigation and, hazard awareness, and make sure that our employees understand, that they can speak up, all of those things, you're going to help reduce those costs. You're going to lower that EMR, you're going to lower that worker compensation rate, which in turn is going to be that beneficial for corporate governance, right? So it's going to help on the back end for those CEOs. It's going to help your board. It's going to help everybody, those stakeholders, understand that you are taking safety training, risk mitigation as an important component within your organization. And I think all of those things really help to solidify the importance of safety for employees all the way up to CEOs as well.
Pick up on something else you said, Andrea, which was corporate governance. And I want to move to the G of ESG. Where do you see safety within the G of ESG?
I kind of already see that in a lot of terms, EHS is already playing that role in the corporate governance side. So when the organization's management, like we kind of just talked about, views safety and safety culture and compliance strategy as something that's incredibly important and as a priority. And so they place safety management systems and training as pillars to their operations, they're going to see that significant cost savings from lowered compensation rates to the lowered EMRs. Those cost savings really help to reduce the overhead. And I think in turn, your boards and your stakeholders are going to look at that from a governance standpoint and really see the value add that safety can offer to these organizations.
Maria, where do you see all of this in terms of the corporate governance structure? You've reported directly to boards, so you know the board role on oversight on a personal basis, but how does a board actually perform that oversight role? Or maybe I could flip it to say, what would you suggest a board need to?
With regard to safety, I think there should be some, more direct reporting to the board on those issues, right? So we had that group at my prior place of employment reporting up into the general counsel. Certainly, there was no reporting directly up to the audit committee or to the board, for that matter, unless there was it had been a serious incident, right? So the board needs to have that information. There needs to be some line of communication up to them. So to the extent that an organization doesn't have that built within their framework, then I think it should be part of that framework. And whether it comes up through the GC or the compliance officer or directly from the EHS individual, I think that just depends on the culture of the organization. But it has to be part of the conversation at that level. I think that's really super important.
Maria, we're both legally trained professionals. Typically, or at least in my career, I had not done a lot of environmental work. And how do you see the role of the E in more of a reporting and measurement standards as opposed to an actual sort of technical analysis?
So I'm not an environmental lawyer either. So, my experience with the E of ESG has been, in my prior life, we would report, we did a CDP filing and we reported on our emissions and, all that other great information, carbon footprint and all that good stuff. And so, I think organizations have to be aware of that. It was interesting for my prior employer. We didn't own any real estate. We leased all of the space that we used for our corporate purposes and for our business purposes, but we managed real estate for clients. And so we would be part of they called it CSR at the time, their corporate social responsibility programs, which is now ESG, as you know, with regard to their energy usage and consumption. We also looked at our travel, right? We looked at, our plane usage and all of that other good stuff. But I think, the E part of it is going to really just depend on an organization's industry and type of business and what they do. But a good corporate citizen needs to be concerned about their impact on the environment. And that's really, I think, part of the driver for this ESG movement we're seeing. And going back to the human capital piece, right? Employees, prospects want to know that organizations are paying attention to that.
And Andrea, what I wanted to ask you was about the E in ESG, but also the E in EHS. And one of the things that struck me when the SEC came out with proposed Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 reporting is if you looked at those numbers, both internally and externally, it would give you the ability as a company to see where there was waste, to see where there was friction, if that I can use that word, from the supply chain, or see where there was actually inefficiency that could be made more efficient. Would that be a fair assessment from your perspective?
Definitely. I think one of the responsibilities or core responsibilities for any EHS professional is to provide that reporting, right? And so we provide on a lot of things, from environmental aspects all the way to, HAZCOM regulation management and things like that. And so, the reporting component that an EHS professional has ties in very nicely with an ESG requirement, specifically for the environmental aspect of it.
Andrea, do you feel like by having an ESG, whether you program and you having a vice president of ESG or VP of sustainability or board committee looking at this, it's really elevating things you've been talking about literally for 20 years to a broader group of decision makers in a company, so they have
truly kind of helping put EHS safety professionals at the forefront of a lot of things right now. And so I think for a long time we were kind of, almost in the background and saying, hey, look at us, pay attention to us, give us some attention, please. And now we're starting to, people are asking us questions. Oh, well, what do you think about this? And how do we do this? And how do you report on this? And so it's elevating, basically in essence, our brand to be able to now become, somewhat experts in ESG. So it's different for us, but there's a lot of crossover. And so it's going to enable us to hopefully get heard more and while we're being listened to, hopefully spread the message about the importance of safety, the importance of, training, the importance of hazard recognition and mitigation, and making sure that workers go home the same way that they came to work.
And then I wanted to end with a question to both of you that's along the lines of the following. When I studied ESG, what I saw was business process across all letters, E and S and G. And that, number one, you were putting an analysis around things that had been looked at before, but in silos. And now you had a VP of sustainability or a board committee or some other higher level within a corporation looking at all of the disparate parts of ESG. And so it would allow decision makers to have more information and a broader basis. But it was essentially a business process. And so I really don't have to worry, or at least the political issues around ESG don't bother me at all because I see this as a business process. And so I wanted to see if that's how you guys see it, or perhaps do you see it in a different way?
And I think it's great that it's brought all these different functions together to look at all of these processes at a higher level, right? And so that they're not siloed. I mean, when I studied ESG, it struck me that it's very much a cross-functional issue, right? That needs input from, these three different groups, maybe four different groups, arguably, and then everybody comes together and escalates it up to the highest levels of management, so that the issues within E, within S, and within G are now become, collective priorities for the organization to focus on and to make, part of how they do business, right? So from the business process perspective. So yeah, no, I agree with you. Andrea, do you have a different view?
Andrea?
So I see kind of that intersection between the EHS and ESG exactly as a set of processes and policies, but really as global considerations that they're all aligning under the sustainability causes, right? So I feel that each subset of the ESG and EHS discussion has at the heart of it a sustainability impact. So the environmental component, of course, is a given, but it goes, in my mind, beyond those greenhouse gases and emission standards. One of the things that I don't think is necessarily really covered on a lot is that in 2003, the UN established the globally harmonized system of classifications, right? So the GHS for labeling of chemicals and hazardous chemicals and things like that. Well, this global approach, I think, that to the development of the classification system of those chemicals and their associated hazards, those are all managed by EHS professionals through the usage of our safety data sheets, our labels, as well as the federal OSHA HCS standards. So in my mind, ESG was first mentioned, of course, in 2006, but I believe that GHS, that globally harmonized system, was the potential catalyst for helping to develop this ESG framework. So just in my mind, it's that global considerations and set of sustainability standards that, hopefully we can adopt internationally. That's how I look at it, though.
Those were great answers. Unfortunately, near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, I wanted to know if our listeners wanted more information from you guys, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you all?
So they can get in touch with me through LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best way to get in touch with me. Andrea?
Exactly the same way. That would be great.
Well, ladies, this has been great. I was really looking forward to this visit, and I have two criteria for a successful podcast. Number one, how much did I learn? And number two, how much fun did I have? And we hit 11 on both. So I wanted to thank you. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the FCPA Compliance Report, which has been sponsored by Traliant. We've linked to Traliant in the show notes, as well as Maria's LinkedIn profile. She is a great resource for you as a compliance professional. So if you have any questions, I would urge you to follow up with Maria. You can reach her through LinkedIn. The FCPA Compliance Report is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.